Hey everyone, welcome back or welcome to the Growth Project podcast by AMPLOS. My name is Dr. Cory Shaffer. So today's episode will feature a guest, Dr. Rebecca Heiss. Rebecca is a stress physiologist, an author, and a keynote speaker. Her new book, Springboard, Transform Stress to Work for You, will be out later this year in 2025. And that serves as the basis for our conversation. And so Rebecca and I are going to dive into just where and why she really got interested in researching stress to begin with. And we'll take a deep dive into her book and really talk about a three-stage or three-step process to where people can really start to leverage stress to work for them instead of working against them. Rebecca's belief and what the research is showing is that stress is not necessarily a good or bad thing. It simply just is, and that the only people who do not experience stress are dead. So really, really great conversation. Rebecca is very, very engaging, awesome speaker. And so I hope you guys enjoy the episode and take a lot out of it so that you can get your stress to start working for you as well. Here is Dr. Rebecca Heiss. Okay, Rebecca, welcome to the Growth Project. I'm excited for our conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, Rebecca, let's start with just a little bit of your background. I think that'll be important context just to set up, the conversation here. So give us just a little bit about, I guess specifically, we're going to talk plenty about stress today, but like, how did you just stumble upon this topic and decide, like, I'm going to dedicate my life to studying this one specific thing? Because, okay, I get a background in biology, but how do you settle
Mhm.
on stress?
Yeah, I think so often we study the thing that we need the most, right? And I am certainly no exception to that rule. As part of a much longer story, I'll keep it brief and just say I have a PhD in stress physiology, mostly because I was going through a really stressful period in my life and didn't know what to do, and decided to just keep going to school. Got this degree, and then quickly after, kind of blew up my own life. Quit my job, sold my house, and divorced my husband in a month. Not saying that's a great trajectory to take, but it's what I did, and was then able to really use the research that I had been conducting to say, oh, this is actually really valuable in the day to day, and how can we actually apply some of the stuff that we're keeping in academia. So that was kind of the start of my career.
Yeah. And I first of all, you said we study the thing that we need the most. So as the person on the other side of the call here who has a PhD in psychology, I guess our listeners are learning a lot about me today as well. Well, okay, so I want to talk about stress, and
Sure.
you start by mentioning in the book here just a statement I think is great. The only people with zero stress are dead.
Yeah.
So just add some context and some color to just stress and how it
Sure.
does impact us. Just tell us a little bit about the research in this space.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody is familiar with the common headlines that they're reading about, like stress is killing you and stress is creating all of these health issues. And yes, and yeah, all of those things are true. And so what people try to do is they're like, oh, I need no stress in my life, right? And to your what you just read, like, yeah, the only people with zero stress are dead. Like, stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. Stress is the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning, that says go seek food, go use the restroom, like go do the things. So stress is a very natural part of life. And we've created these labels that actually are the thing that is really the health concern for most of us, is interpreting all of these signals as bad, as negative. And I don't think you need to think stress is good either. Stress just is. Stress is a part of life. And so the less we fight against it, the more we can begin to interpret it differently and use it to our advantage.
Well, and so before we introduce like your model and the approach that you're suggesting, maybe we all take and try to adopt in your book, walk us through when stress is bad for us. What's
Mm.
happening?
Yeah, what's happening is well, a couple things. One, we have this constriction of our blood vessels, right? Our body is responding to what it believes is an imminent threat, some life and death situation. And so it's literally preparing us to either fight or flee the scene or freeze in the space that we need to hide in. So our body is responding to an imminent threat. And the problem that stress is, for us today, is that very few of us have actual life and death situations happening, right? We're sitting in traffic and we have the stressor and we're going to be late for something and we can't escape the car and we can't get out of traffic. And now we're sitting there. We're not running, we're not active, we're not using our bodies in the way that our body is prepping us to. And so that's when we have really negative side effects to the stress. And the second piece of that is that humans are the only animals that create their own stress through their thoughts. So most stressors happen, the animal moves through it, and it's over. Like there's a great book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky, another great stress physiologist. And the idea, the entire book is summed up just as like, hey, when a zebra gets chased by a tiger or a lion, sorry, and they have this massive cortisol response. It's a big stressor for good reason. And then they outrun the tiger. That's it. It's over. Like they immediately go back to eating grass. I mean, there's no big existential crisis that they're having of going, oh, what did I do to cause that thing that made this? And so we as humans tend to have this overriding response that keeps stress very high in our lives when it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah. So again, it's about what I always say talking about this kind of stuff, and you're much more versed in it than I am, but we're designed to survive, not to thrive.
Yes.
And the perceived threat is really what we're talking about here, right? The difference between humans and animals oftentimes is that perceived threat. Like you said, like there's no real danger behind missing the work deadline, but your perception of it is, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a much more succinct way of saying it. That's well done.
Well, so let's talk then about your formula. And this is something that I think I'm familiar with, but have never really probably talked a ton about on the podcast. So it's great that you get to be the one to do this.
Thank you.
And bringing some of your own language to it, which I think is great. So walk us through then, if that's what it looks like, if we're doing things poorly, right? We're labeling this is bad, and therefore
Right.
it becomes bad.
Right.
What does it look like to do it differently? What are you proposing here in your book?
Yeah, so the book basically walks people through what I call the fear less stress formula. And fear less is really about there's a couple components here, right? The fear less is recognizing you don't have to be fearless, right? You don't have to be unafraid. But when you have a stress response and you don't have to completely recognize that this is a life and death situation, when you can step outside of that, you can fear a little bit less and be a little more rational in that response. So there's three main components to the fearless formula. The first is recognizing that it's not a tiger. And this is kind of my lighthearted way of saying, when you sit back and you just go, okay, this is real. I feel this thing. What is it? What is it actually? How can is it a real life and death situation? And 99.99999% of the time, it's not, right? Which allows us then to sit back and go, okay, then I'm having this response, and this response isn't going to be useful to me if I just run with it, right? If I just sit in this stressed out state, that's not a helpful piece. So I'm becoming cognitive of the fact that my body is trying to help me escape whatever the stressor is, but it's not a tiger. So that's step one, is recognize it's not a tiger.
Well,
The second, yeah, please
yeah,
go
no.
ahead.
So we'll take it kind of one stage at a time, if that's good with you.
Yeah,
Okay, so
perfect. Much
I
better.
recognize this is not a tiger, and again, when we're doing this the quote unquote wrong way, unfortunately, the way that comes way too natural for us is we are building it up as if it is a tiger, and instead of just allowing that to almost come and go or create some distance between myself and what I'm feeling, that just persists and it builds, and that's really when it starts to impact us in a negative way, right? Because we're not designed to be in that state for long stretches of time, right?
Bingo. Yeah. And we do this thing and it's very natural. We try and thought stop. We're like, okay, I'm not going to think about that thing. I'm just going to push it aside. I know stress isn't healthy, so I'm going to put it over here. And instead, what that does, if you've ever tried to not think about something in the moment, like don't think about pink elephants right now, right? Your whole audience right now is thinking about pink. Whether or not you want to, you're like, oh, don't think about it. Don't think about it. Don't think about this thing. And as a result, we actually think about that thing significantly more. And that causes more stress. So rather than trying to avoid the stressor, this is the moment where we can say, okay, this isn't life and death. This isn't a tiger. and we begin to invite it in, right? We begin to say, okay, how do I process this? What can I learn from this? How do I grow from this? And one of the exercises that I invite people to do that I think is really, really helpful is if you can take 3 minutes and simply journal out all of your fears. Like write the thing down. Like this is what's happening. This is what's going through my head. Here's how I'm processing it. This is what I think is going to happen. What that does is twofold. One, the stress response is really built for 3 minutes of screaming terror across the savannah, right? That's Robert Sapolsky. I wish it was mine. I would claim it all day if I could, but 3 minutes of screaming terror. So when we take those 3 minutes and we say, okay, this is what it's built for, and then we allow ourselves to process it in the moment rather than trying to avoid it, right? We get it out onto paper. What that does, the second piece of that, is it brings all of the limbic system, that like emotional processing center, to the forefront of our brain because writing requires cognition. So now we're a little more cognitive about what we're going through. And that allows us to sort of separate ourselves from this massive emotional response and give us this new perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And then ultimately, what you suggest to a degree here in the book, and maybe this is just very directly, but I'll let you explain it. But
Yeah.
stress inoculation, explain that. What does that mean?
Yeah, training the tiger. So this is really an experiment that's been done, I don't know, for years. Again, I wish I could claim it as my own. But stress inoculation is exactly what it sounds like. It's exposure therapy, right? It's training your brain not to be super reactive in all of these moments where it naturally will be. Like rejection and failure are two of the biggest things that cause stress in our emotional states. So we can train our brains to be a little less reactive by actually going out and seeking some discomfort. So the Stoics were huge on this, right? Like wearing a ridiculous outfit. Does it kill you? Nope. Do people look at you weird? Are they rejecting you? Are they telling stories? And you'll get in your head about it and you'll tell all these stories about all these people that are doing, and then nothing bad happens. And then your brain layers this down and says, oh, interesting. I had a stress response and I didn't die today. And then we do this again and we go and we ask for a discount on a cup of coffee, right? And you hear that and you think, oh, well, that's easy to do, right? There was a famous experiment done by a cognitive scientist, um, Milgram, and he asked his students to go out and just ask for a seat on the New York subway. Just somebody sitting down, ask for the seat. And students years later said this was one of the most traumatic things because they were so afraid of the story of the rejection that many of them couldn't ask. And so this whole idea of stress inoculation is putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, feeling the stress response, recognizing that it's not a tiger and it doesn't kill us. And then that allows us for the next time that that thing happens, that you're not actively seeking the discomfort, to register it slightly differently and go, oh, yeah, I know what this is. Remember all those times that this happened and it wasn't an imminent threat. How do I want to process this now?
Yeah.
So it kind of creates some space. Yeah.
Is there any research on, I don't, and I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but I at least um like how long that takes, like how many reps do I need
Mm.
for that to start to feel different, to have a less of a stress response?
Yeah. So this is the bad news. It's a continuous process,
Yeah.
right? Fear and rejection are so deeply built into us that it requires an ongoing process, an ongoing, um, I guess, inoculation, right? Because I can now ask for a discount on a cup of coffee without any kind of response because I've done it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I can get up and speak in front of thousands of people and not have a stress response because I've done it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. But any new situation is going to cause a little moment. And I think while you can hear that and say, well, that's not worth it because, I can't create the situation of X. I can't create the situation of this game winning point that I have to be. Well, yes, and you can create the situation where your body responds differently to that stress. And I think that's key. While you can't maybe create the exact scenario that you're going to face, you can create a pattern in your brain that allows you to go, huh, wait, I know this. This is just like all these other things that I've done. I can handle this differently.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like what's so important about it is this process, as long as you're taking ownership over it, right? It's sort of like you have the pen in your hand. You're prepared for what you're about to face. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be any less threatening or feel any less real. But because you're sort of deciding, hey, here's what I'm going to do, I think it immediately helps you going into it to be able to process it and, like you said, kind of create some distance.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly it. It's so often we don't control the stressors that come into our life, but we do get to control the stress response or how we respond to the stress response. Um, and so this is really exactly to your point, taking ownership of that and going, wait, I'm seeking this, so I'm in control here. Yeah, and allows us to feel more in control when it finds us.
Okay, well, let's go now. Second stage, we go from,
Yeah.
okay, this isn't a tiger. Now what?
Okay, so now we have an opportunity because we've recognized this isn't life and death. And so as a result of that, we have all of this energy. And to me, the next step is to get curious, to recognize that stress isn't good or bad, but is energy that can be transferred. So I think so often the message is get rid of, get rid of, get rid of. And I don't know if you've ever had the situation where you're really stressed out and you go and you talk to somebody and you tell them how stressed out you are and what's going on, and they say, you know what, Cory, just calm down. Oh my God, it is like you want to punch the person, you want to scream. Like it's a horrible thing. And yet that's the thing that we're doing to ourselves all the time. We're like, oh, just calm down. I need to just breathe and take some breaths and just calm down. And the reality is, we can't physiologically prevent our adrenal glands from releasing cortisol or adrenaline, or like we can't physiologically change that response. But what we can change is the emotional valence. So when we have an emotion, when we have a response, you can kind of think of this as a two-axis response. We've got the arousal level on the y-axis, right? So very, very calm, very low, to really super agitated or excited or stressed on the higher end. And then the emotional valence is really negative and really positive. So when we're having a stress response, we don't control the arousal level. We are heightened. We're in that heightened state. But what we do get to choose is what that means. So our body or our brain is constantly looking to our body to say, what does this mean? What's happening? I'm having this response. What does this mean? And one of my favorite studies is actually a really simple one. They had people put pens in their mouth like this, right? And it forces a smile. And what they found was that people who had a smile on their face found things funnier. They thought, we typically think we smile because we're happy. But in fact, the feedback is we're happy a lot of times because we're smiling. And so when we have this response and our brain is going, what does this mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? We get to choose the emotional valence. And it can mean we're really excited. It can mean we're really angry. It can mean we're really stressed. But that's the choice that we get to make. And so when we get curious, when we kick ourselves out of the fear response, that immediate like I'm stressed, this is an anxiety producing thing, and we say, wait, what does this mean that my heart is pounding? Oh, it could mean that my body is getting prepared to execute, right? It's pumping blood to my brain so I can think faster, pumping blood to my muscles so I can execute on this thing. When we're curious about it and not just having that immediate leap to this is bad, it changes the entire outcome. So I'll pause there. There's a lot to say here.
No, 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 that's great. Yeah. So, and ultimately in the book, you describe this as like the transfer, right? We're transferring that energy. We're sort of now choosing to utilize that and direct it in a way that's more, I don't know what the right word is here, productive, essentially.
Useful. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
And so we're going now from like anxiety to excitement. We're interpreting stress as enhancing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all of these things are pushing us in a direction that's just essentially like different and so
That's
much
it.
better and more adaptive than this is terrible and I'm stressed and it sucks and life is ending, right?
Yeah. Which full stop, like there are going to be moments like that. And I will say, sitting right here, having written the book on this, I still have those moments.
Mhm.
And that's when I go back into that 3 minutes of screaming terror. And I'm like, God, I'm not here to be Pollyanna-ish and say, oh, you just had a cancer diagnosis? Great. Have an adventure with it. That's fantastic. That's not the point. The
Yeah.
point is going, wow, that's awful. Great. How do you want to move forward with this? What can we do with that energy?
Yeah.
Because it is awful. Some situations just are.
So Rebecca,
But what do you control? Yeah.
pause here
Sorry.
for a second. I'm sure you're familiar with this in some capacity, but I feel like a lot of our listeners are probably going to recognize this, which is why I'm trying to connect the dots.
Yeah.
Uh, are you familiar with retired Navy SEAL Jocko Willing
Oh yeah.
and like
Fantastic. Yeah.
his good sort of mantra? Like, is that similar here? Like, we're just choosing to interpret a situation instead of in the past as like, man, this is so stressful, this is terrible, but now I'm able to just look at this and be like, all right, awesome, right, good,
Embrace the suck.
yeah,
Embrace the suck. Yeah. In fact, like one of the things that I put in this section of the book is the marine concept of
yeah.
oorah, right?
Go ahead and
Which
talk about that. That's kind of what I was hoping we would get to here. So,
okay,
yeah,
good. Yeah, good. Good. I mean, if any of you are in the armed services or around Marines, this oorah response, right? To it can be a deployment. Oorah, let's go. You might be terrified about it, but what you're doing is you're transferring that energy into this emotive shout, like oorah, let's go. We're in it together. It's a camaraderie, cheering, um, literal vocalization of this transfer from stress to excitement. And I think that's the connection that you're making with the Jocko
yeah,
work. Yeah,
yeah. Again, I just want our listeners to recognize like that to me is this is a much more in-depth sort of science-backed approach to that. That's just
yeah,
Jocko's, meathead, like, oh, good, same
yeah.
deal.
But you know what? Oh,
Same deal.
good. Same. It's great. It works. It works.
Yeah.
It's the same. Yep. Same stuff. Who
Okay. So
cares? I mean, honestly, at some level, like, who cares? I can show you
yeah, yeah,
science all day long, but like, who cares? If you say, "Oh, good," and it works, you're doing it.
yeah.
You don't need the. You don't need the science. Yep.
Okay, so we've hit stage one, hey, this isn't a tiger. Stage two, approach it with curiosity. Let's transfer this energy, start moving it in the right direction.
Yeah.
Stage three, what is it?
Yeah, stage three is the trajectory. It's the actual springboard trajectory. Where do you point all this energy? So now you've kind of gotten your butterflies in alignment. Where are you pointing it? And I think so often what fear does is fear will say anything but, right? Anything but, and I'll use my example again, like quit my job, sold my house, and divorced my husband. Now, some people would say, oh, very brave, look at you. And I'm like, no, 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 that wasn't anything but. That was anything but this relationship, anything but this job. I wasn't pointing my energy anywhere. And so fear really has this way, especially in a stress response, to say like anything but this situation, but it doesn't point you in a direction. So the trajectory is really about recognizing where do I want to go with this? What is the goal or the outcome? And I make some suggestions in this chapter about creating the winner's effect, the winner cycle by producing these really small trajectories forward, rather than okay, here's my outcome goal, and if I hit it, great, because that just produces more fear. Like it's a long-term goal, it's off in the future, it's scary, and I think we're all familiar with the small wins like setup of like hitting these smaller goals along the way. But there's a lot of biology behind that as well. Like when you hit a really small goal, even if it's like I put on my sneakers today to go for a walk. I didn't even do the walk, but I put on my sneakers. That small goal sets off a dopamine pathway that and again, people are familiar with dopamine. It's a happy hormone, but it's also an addiction hormone. It's a motivation addiction hormone. So you want to do it more. And the smaller we set these trajectories, the more we can point something toward an outcome. Whether or not we hit the outcome, we're getting some progress along the way.
Yeah. Can you provide like is there any one just concrete example? And you can again use your own experience
Yeah.
here, something kind of made up, it doesn't matter. But here's what I'm experiencing some stress or some anxiety about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how do I approach that with what you're describing here? Just these maybe small, very concrete actions that are pointing me in the right direction. Uh,
Yep.
what would that look like in practice?
Yeah. So I think the example that I use in the book, and I chose these examples. I think I've used two examples in the book, and they're two like the most common resolutions that people have every New Year's, which is to lose weight and to save more money. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, we'll take the save money thing first. So looking at various trajectories. I've got all this energy. I'm stressed out. I know I want to channel it. I've gotten curious with this stress. Where do I want to point my trajectory? Well, you can pick any number of trajectories. I'm going to eat out less, maybe. which will help with the weight loss too. I am going to contribute a little bit more to my retirement savings. I am going to pick up a side hustle. I'm going to create a budget. All of those things are small little moves that will ultimately look at the end of the year, add up to a different number in your bank account. But if you just say, okay, by the end of the year, I'm going to have $100,000 more in my bank account, and you're not checking every single day or looking at these small progress goals along the way, if you hit $80,000, you're going to be disappointed. It's going to be a fail. But you wouldn't have hit $80,000 if you hadn't been making those small trajectories along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, and it's somewhat like I'm trying to think about some of our listeners, maybe like, okay, I work in a sales organization. I have to meet my sales number, right? There's a ton
Right.
of stress that comes around that month after month and quarter after quarter and year over year. And of course, like that's what we want to do. That's the thing that's
Yeah.
causing stress and what you're feeling all month long. And yet it's because you're so fixated on, am I just going to hit the goal or not?
That's
As
it.
opposed to what you're describing is, hey, can I just, be a little bit better about managing my time? And maybe that means blocking off some, time on my calendar to make calls. This means following up with my clients. This means like you're just
Right.
outlining small little steps that you believe are going to help produce the outcome, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, one of the examples that I often will give in keynotes, and it's kind of a fun, silly example, but I think it gets the point across, is my husband loves to race, and I'm not a race car driver. He's lapping me all day at this in this event that we went to. And just once, I'm like, I'm gonna pass him. I feel good about this. Like I understand this. I'm gonna go for it. And so in my head, that's my goal. I am going to beat my husband. I'm going to get a faster time on this track, right? And I gun it and I spin out like immediately. And my reaction to that was, well, shit. Excuse me. Sorry, I should have asked if I can swear. Well, shit. Like I don't even want to get back in the car because now I'm embarrassed. Now I've got this other stressor of like, well, I'm not good enough, and all of these things in my head going like, oh, that's you should be ashamed. And if I don't get back in the car, then I don't get anywhere closer to my goal. Whether or not I beat my husband that day, I don't get anywhere closer. And so, yeah, I got back in the car. I spun out 16 more times, but I got a heck of a lot closer to that goal than I would have if I just stopped. So, this idea of daring to fail versus failing to dare becomes really important. And I think so often, we've all heard ad nauseum the idea of you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Right.
But I think what we fail to recognize is we often, there's an addendum to that, right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and you miss most of the ones you do. You think about professional athletes. I'm a basketball player. A professional athlete shoots 44%. Like, that's ridiculous. You're missing a lot more than you're making, but you got to shoot. You got to keep doing it. And so having those small trajectories allows us to recognize not just the outcome goal, but the costs of inaction, of not showing up, of not doing that small motion forward or toward something.
Yeah. Yeah, really good. I want to make sure we attribute that quote to the right person. Originally Wayne Gretzky,
Yes,
famously Michael Scott, of course.
right. Yes, yes. Which is
Uh,
exactly how I have it set up in my slides. I appreciate that
Good.
you
Good.
shared
Okay.
that.
All right. Well, talk to me about because I think within this stage is where we would find some discussion around post-traumatic growth. Talk to us
Yeah.
about that.
We hear a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And for good reason. 8% of the population struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder. I would say that estimate is probably low. I think there's a lot more of us that struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder that's undiagnosed. All that to say, going through life is traumatic. Period. Full stop. End of sentence. Going through life is traumatic for any and all of us. And people handle that trauma differently. And if you just let people alone, about 40% or more will experience post traumatic growth. And what I think is fascinating here is that when I ask people in, large audiences, how many of you have heard of post traumatic stress disorder? The whole hand will go, everybody's hand will go up. How many of you have heard of post traumatic growth? And there's like a scattering of hand, one or two people and thousands of people. And I think this really speaks volumes to where we're placing the emphasis. Like, oh, this is a disorder. You've gone through trauma. You must have some issues. You must have some real big things that we got to sort through because stress is bad. Whereas post-traumatic growth is recognized in the vast majority of people that go through trauma. Or sorry, not the vast majority, a much larger percentage of people that go through trauma. And the idea behind post-traumatic growth is that trauma creates a refiguring of sorts. And many people, as a result of trauma, grow. They find deeper connection to people and purpose and community. They feel like their life is more worth living. And so, as much as we try to avoid stress and certainly trauma in our lives, it is often the very thing that gives meaning and purpose to our life. So it's this strange dichotomy. I think of it very much like oxygen. In that oxygen is really toxic for us. Like it's really, really bad for us. Oxygen is the thing that ultimately kills most of us because, it ages us. It's an incredibly toxic molecule and you can't live without it.
Right.
So same is true for stress. Stress is the thing that gives us meaning and purpose in our life. And if we can use it in a way and point our trajectory toward that growth in recognizing, well, here's an example I'll challenge your listeners with. This confused me for a long time because there's a lot of studies that show that stress correlates very highly with meaning and purpose in people's lives. And anytime I'd say that to people, they're like, "Yeah, but I could do with less stress." So here's my challenge: I want you to think about a project or an accomplishment that you're most proud of, and then go back in time to when you were in the middle of that project or accomplishment. What was your stress level? And most people will say, "Oh, it was off the charts." Like on a scale of 1 to 100, it was 1,000. And the problem that I think so many of us have is that we can recognize that in retrospect. We can look back and go, "Yeah, that was really stressful, but now it's meaningful."
Mhm.
And my goal for us in this trajectory section is to recognize in the moment that this is meaningful and purposeful, and it's moving us towards something that that is valuable.
Yeah. No,
Nobody gets upset when your shoe's untied, right? That's not stressful.
well, I'm glad though that you kind of brought it around there because I was actually gonna ask you. It seems like most people can recognize in hindsight, right? Like looking back, like, oh man, that sucked when I was in it, but now I can appreciate like it was good for me.
Right.
And essentially what you're proposing here is more of just, hey, when you're in the middle of it, learn to appreciate it there, and also how you can appreciate it after the fact.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. And I
About like, okay,
again,
what's something difficult that I went through? I'm trying to relate this in my mind, and I'm like, okay, after I got my career started, I got my PhD, my first job, I lost my first job in like 6 months. Like no fault of my own, right? But looking back, it was like that was really, really difficult. And then after the fact, like years later, I can look back and be like, man, I'm really glad that that happened. You know, in the middle of that, I was not thinking that one
yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
But so that's why I wanted to make sure we just connected the dots and made sense of everything. Is like, yeah, a lot of the time people can look back and in retrospect be like, oh man, I appreciate that now.
Mhm.
But we're talking about in the moment. Let's just be better there, and then you're still going to be able to appreciate it afterwards.
Yeah, which I want to be really crystal clear here is so challenging, right?
Yeah.
I am not saying this is easy. I'm not saying like you should be thrilled you just lost your job and you don't have direction, you don't have a income in the next 6 months. Like that's a terrifying moment. And that recognition of like, okay, wait, maybe this will lead to that points us toward a trajectory of hope. And I think this idea of I genuinely believe learned hopefulness is the antidote to so much of the struggle and strife that we have with stress. Because hope gives us the power to go, yeah, there is something that I can grow, that I can learn from in this moment.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's great. Um, okay, well, anything else here? We kind of worked our way, all the way through. Again, I know high level here, but
Yeah, no.
your stress formula, anything else to add related to stress, related to your perspective on this, the formula. What did we miss?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest, well, there's two pieces that I want to just emphasize. One is something that I failed to mention in the transfer stage, which is just curiosity and fear cannot coexist. If you can remember that, if nothing else, if you remember nothing else of this entire conversation, but you can remember that curiosity and fear cannot coexist because for 200,000 plus years, nobody have had a tiger charging them, right? And went, huh, like, I wonder how fast it's coming, or I wonder what kind, how many stripes it has. Like you can't, it kicks you out of the fear response when we're curious. And so if you remember nothing else of this conversation, when you're in stress, if you can become curious, you're going to point yourself on the trajectory automatically. So that's probably the biggest takeaway that I would offer people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I guess curiosity and fear cannot coexist, but you have a choice of which path you're going to take, right? And one is
Yeah.
the road less traveled, and basically that's what this is all about, right? It's like, let's take the road less traveled.
There it is. Yeah, and I think that the only other piece that I would add is this isn't a cure for anxiety. It's not a cure for stress, right? So often I think I've had people come to me and they're like, "Well, I choose curiosity and I choose to be excited, but I still feel anxious." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're going to. That's you're still going to feel the anxiety. So don't think that you're going to automatically just not feel the fear or feel the anxiety or feel the stress. This is a choice to say, okay, I'm going to choose to be excited about that and hold both things simultaneously. People will ask me like, don't you get scared every time you go up on stage? I'm like, yeah, every single time, and I'm excited about it. So holding those two things at the same time, I think, is really important to recognize. Nobody is stress free,
Right,
and you
right.
shouldn't want to be. Yeah,
All right, the last thing I got for you, and you're about the author section here at the
yeah,
it says when you bump into her out running the trail, ask her about any number of things here. From biting lemons, a failed app, walking 500 miles across Spain, perfect ice cream recipe, or crows. Give us one of these. 60 seconds or less. What do you got?
I'll do the Spain one. So I hiked the Camino de Santiago. I strongly encourage you all to do it. It's an amazing hike. Starts in France, ends in Portugal, just 500 miles across. And if ever you need to have more self-reflection or understand who you are and what purpose you have, walking with a backpack by yourself through Spain for 500 miles, it's going to give you the time to do it. So, yeah, I was very privileged to be able to do that.
Awesome. Awesome. Really cool.
Yeah.
Well, Rebecca, thanks so much. Do you want to give the book a plug here? When's it coming out?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, yeah. So the book is called Springboard. It's right behind me here. Transform stress to work for you. This is the advanced copy. It is coming out in hard copy in September of this year, 2025. You can pre-order it now on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and I'm sure a number of independent bookstores as well. So pick your favorite. I would super appreciate the support. And if you have any questions or concerns, by all means, reach out to me. I'm very much reachable. So I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Rebecca, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you being on Growth Project.
Thanks so much, Cory. It's my pleasure.